Night is about Elie Wiesel and the Holocaust and Jews in general, and so some of the Jewish traditions come up in the book. And in order to understand their significance, we need to know what they are. So Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, and it's celebrated in September. Uh, Yom Kippur is the last 10 days of penance that start with Rosh Hashanah. So it's a way to atone for their sins throughout the year so that they can start the new year on a clean slate. Hanukkah is celebrated in December, and it celebrates the dedication of the second temple, meaning the first temple was destroyed, they built the second one and dedicated it. And they had enough candle wax, or it wasn't wax, but oil, to burn for only one night, but it burned for 8, which was a miracle. And so they give one gift per night, but the gifts are usually small and not that exciting. Passover is celebrated in the spring. It actually occurs during the same week as Holy Week around Easter for Christians. So actually, the Last Supper of Jesus was during Passover, and that's why the Eucharist is celebrated with an unleavened piece of bread, because during Passover Jesus would have used matzah, and so that celebrates spring and it commemorates the Jewish people's escape from Egypt, and it lasts a week. So they go through some stories of the Old Testament, and it's a very long meal. And they have unleavened bread because during Exodus, Moses and the Jews fled Egypt, and they didn't have time to let the bread rise, so it was flat bread, which is why we have matzah. Jewish dietary laws. They are quite complex, but in a nutshell, you need to know that they cannot eat camel, rabbit, pig, shellfish, and meat and dairy together. If Jews keep kosher, which most Jews I know um, don't keep strictly kosher, they have to have a separate set of cookware and plates and utensils for meat and for dairy because they should not go together. So, but most families I know aren't that extreme. But they definitely don't eat pig. That's the one constant that I've always seen. The creation of Israel in Jewish history, this has been complicated, and although most of this slide happens after the Holocaust, it still impacts the world today. There is still anti-Semitism, which we can see even here in Flagstaff, um, and so it's complex. Jews didn't really have a homeland for centuries. They were kicked out of Israel, which was called Palestine, and so they just kind of lived in a bunch of countries all over the world, a lot in Europe, and they didn't have a place to call home. So after the Holocaust, when 6 million Jews were assassinated, um, Europe decided to take most of Palestine and make it Israel, so that Jews could have a home. And that caused some issue because then Palestinians wanted some of their land back. Um, the two areas that are fought over the most are the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Both Israelis and Palestinians claim the area as their homeland. Um, and so that's gotten really contested, especially in recent years when Israelis just take more and more of the Palestinians' land. It's interesting, though, because uh, Jews and Palestinians who actually live in Israel together and live next door to each other, they get along just fine. But some extremists and politicians have made the issue worse. As I mentioned in a previous unit, Abraham is the father of all three major monotheistic religions. So, monotheistic means the belief in one supreme God. And Abraham does appear in the Old Testament and, of course, in the Torah. And in the Quran. So Judaism is the oldest religion, followed by Christianity, and then Islam is the youngest. Um, Jews only made up 1% of the population in Europe. So they were definitely scapegoated by Hitler. Um, and it was a very, very small population. In a nutshell, who you are born to, basically your parents, that shapes the path of your life, the color of your skin, your socioeconomic class, because there are laws and systems in place that determine who can succeed. Some people have the cards stacked against them. And Jews were one of those groups of people. And so that's why it's important to vote and to pay attention to politics, because we want everyone to have equal rights and not have the cards stacked against them. We're a country where all men and women are created equal, and our policies and systems should reflect that. Now I want to review Foreshadowing and some other literary devices so that you guys, again, can see what's coming, because Elie Wiesel uses these a lot. Foreshadowing hints at what is to come. You can see it in the setting. You can see it in how the narrator is speaking, in word choice, if the word choice is optimistic or pessimistic, or if an object or idea, in other words, a symbol, is introduced. Friedrich Nietzsche. We learn about his ideas in the foreword or the preface, and so I think it's important that you guys read him. He is a very controversial philosopher, and I think that you guys are mature enough to read a segment of what he wrote and to decide what it means. One of the reasons we go to school is to learn about things that we may disagree with and understand why do we disagree with them, but also why other people hold different beliefs from us, and to be able to accept them. And so although you may hate Nietzsche and you might think he's an awful person, it is important to read what he wrote and see what did he actually mean. Okay? So he was a 19th century philosopher from Germany. He also criticized culture. He was a composer, poet, philologist, which means he studied language, and he was also a Latin and Greek scholar. His sister curated his manuscripts after his death. That meant that she took his manuscripts, edited them, and she had different beliefs from him. And that's how he became associated with Nazism and fascism. So he was actually opposed to anti-Semitism and nationalism, which means he would have supported Jews. So it really depends who edits your writing after you pass, because they can affect how you're read. So luckily we know better now. What did Nietzsche believe? So one of his most famous beliefs was the death of God and nihilism. So there's multiple interpretations. Some believe that he's an atheist. Some believe that he had a subtle understanding of divinity, meaning that he believed in God, but it was a very difficult. It was difficult to parse or state what he believed. And one other interpretation is what he meant by the death of God was that Europe had slowly become so secular, meaning so non-religious, that they had effectively killed the Abrahamic God. So because it was so secular, one interpretation of God was no longer valid. So that's kind of the multiple interpretations of what death of God means to Nietzsche. And because we have his writing only and not him to explain it further, it's harder for us to really understand what he meant. But that's also kind of the brilliance of reading different philosophies, is how we interpret them ourselves. Nihilism means that nothing has any inherent importance and life lacks purpose. There's nothing of value to be found in the world, and that you need to overcome this idea so that you can have culture and a foundation so that your civilization can thrive. So he's not saying that life is purposeless. He's saying if you start with that and then you go from there, you can have a strong foundation for your society and culture and how you build the systems of your society. So online, there's an excerpt of what Nietzsche wrote. I want you guys to underline what you think is important. You can use the comment function to write in the margins, or highlight in a different color, or use an exclamation point if you find something surprising. So once you do that, please come back to this video. Here's how I interpreted the passage. And my interpretation is just one perspective. You can agree or you can disagree or you can qualify it. It starts out with images and a story about a madman looking for God. He's claiming that many people have lost faith, so maybe they see him as mad when he's not. Um, when it's a madman, we don't know if we can trust him. He's an unreliable narrator. And so that makes the interpretation of this entire story difficult because should we take what he's saying literally or not? Um, and so it really is up for debate. Do you trust someone who's not in their right mind? The madman claims that people have killed God. And so the logical question is to answer, why have they killed God? And then he implies that there's no reason to live. So he might be on the very base of nihilism, meaning that life is purposeless. And then how can people be washed clean of their sin if God is dead? So if there's no Abrahamic God and you do something wrong, how do you eventually forgive yourself, or how is the slate wiped clean if you don't have God? And so that's something that a secular society or atheists have to decide. And then the madman says that God is not yet dead, meaning God is still alive, but he will be because it has already happened. And so this is an allegory, it's a story talking about what could happen. And it's confusing. This sentence is confusing. God is not yet dead, he will be, it has already happened, because you have different verb tenses. So looking to the future, not yet dead, but it will happen. And then it has already happened. So that's kind of going into God's timeline where God knows what will happen, what is yet to come, what has been, omnipresent, omnipotent. That's what that kind of means. But perhaps it means that because it has not yet happened, people can change how society's going. So it's really complex, and it really depends on how you interpret it. So when we're going through night, you will find a passage like this, and it's important to know, what does Nietzsche have to do with night? How can we read night keeping what Nietzsche's philosophies are in mind? And then do you think that Wiesel is a nihilist as he writes this?